problem to sit out there and listen to long-winded speeches, and I'll tell you this, I'd rather stand up here and give one than have to sit out there and listen to it. I know I had an uncle back home, a drinking Uncle Eb, and he had a hearing problem. He goes to see the family doctor. The doctor told him he had to give up alcoholic beverages. He was going to lose his hearing completely. When he got back home to the family, we were curious what Uncle Eb was going to do. He says, well, I reckon I'll go on getting deep. He says, I've been thinking it over, and I've decided I like what I've been drinking a hell of a lot better than what I've been hearing. This has been a wonderful program. I've enjoyed it very much, and I hope I don't come along now and spoil it for you. I was reading about a funeral they had over in Scotland. One pallbearer stepped in an open grave and broke his leg. Incidentally, this is what I call an awkward situation. The next day, the local newspaper tried to give account of the story. Said, yesterday at Donald Graham's funeral, Blackie McGregor, one of the pallbearers, stepped in an open grave and fractured his limb. This unfortunate incident cast gloom on the whole occasion. It is a real pleasure for me to be here with the sportsmen of Norfolk. And incidentally, this is the kind of crowd I like to have. You know, one that's healthy, intelligent, and just a little bit drunk. I have traveled around over the country quite a bit since our football season ended. I've had occasion to visit with quite a few sports gatherings, and each time I make one of these appearances, people are most interested in talking about our football team of this year, and it's the type of team, I guess, that does stir up quite a bit of interest, having had the record that we've had, and they want to know something about the ingredients that go into making up our football team. I think the same ingredients that go into make up the football team goes into make up an individual, so it should apply, the things I'm going to talk about, should apply on the individual basis. I'm sure that many of the people that have been introduced here tonight for these awards have some of these same qualities I'd like to discuss with you. I think one of the first things that an individual or a team has to have is preparation. I had an early lesson in this thing of preparation. This was back when I was about a freshman, I guess, in high school in my hometown of Hollis, Oklahoma. And this is a little town, about 3,000 to 4,000, and we had a limited number of boys, and we had to play all sports at Hollis. And even I got interested in boxing, and I entered a couple of little Golden Glove tournaments there in the county, and I guess this is about the worst thing that can happen to a 16-year-old kid. I won them, and I was just set up to accept the ill advice of some of the people in town, some of the grown men, to enter the Golden Glove tournament over at Altus, Oklahoma, which is a little stiffer competition. And I'll never forget this. I go over, and for my opponent, the first fight of this Golden Glove tournament, I drew a boy from Fort Sill Indian School by the name of Tully. This was a scheduled 3-rounder, lasted a minute a round. I crawled in the ring completely confident. And as I said, it only lasted 3 minutes. But I never got so tired of one guy in such a short time in all my life. Really, all I did was get up and then get up again. Some of you guys have a perverted sense of humor. This guy's whipping hell out of me. And after the fight was over, I got to thinking about it, and I wondered why he was able to take my measure so completely. And you know, I thought about it, and it wasn't a secret. The guy had skipped more rope, he'd punched more bag, he'd done more road work, he'd sparred more rounds, he'd had more fights. He was simply better prepared for that fight than I was. I moved to the University of Washington, from the University of Washington to the University of Texas. And of course, you know this is a great lumber region up there. And in my travels there, I had a chance to talk to an old logger. And he told me this. He says, Darrell, if I had 5 minutes to quickly cut down a tree or reach hill, he said, I believe I'd take 3 of that 5 minutes to sharpen my axe. And the thought occurs to me that here's a man who knows how to prepare to do a job. You fellow coaches, I don't know whether you have a lot of catchy signs in your dressing rooms or not. I haven't had an occasion to be in all your dressing rooms. Personally, I like them. I was in a high school dressing room the other day, and I saw a little sign up. It was a definition of a temperamental athlete. 98% temper and 2% mental. Little subtle, but makes a point. And I believe in these signs. We have a sign in our dressing room. We have one because we put so much stock in it. And it says this. It says luck is LSU in the Cotton Bowl without quite as much luck as we had this last year, without quite as results. We lost the ball game 2 touchdowns to Austin. After the ball game was over, alumni, friends, boosters, backers started coming to me, patting me on the back, trying to feel sorry for me, saying, Darrell, I have never seen such an unlucky team in my life. LSU recovered 5 of our fumbles, intercepted 2 of our passes. I've never seen such an unlucky team as the University of Texas. But you know, I kind of have a sneaking hunch that Charlie McClendon, the coach of the LSU Tigers, told his boys that if we threw the pass stray, one of you safety men or the halfbacks run under that pass. Or maybe if the Texas boys are careless and they slobber and puke the ball up, one of you fall on it. So I couldn't quite buy that. I really believe this. I believe that luck is what happens when preparation meets with opportunity, and I think you make a lot of your luck. One of the other things I think is needed to go along with preparation would be specialization. And I don't think that I would get any argument out of you, especially with all the Navy personnel that you have so close at hand, that we're living in a specialized age. All you have to do is pick up the front page of the newspaper today, and I'll bet you somewhere on it you'll read something about a Sputnik, Mutnik, intercontinental ballistic missile, or something that's in the scientific age. And I don't think that it's wrong, personally, to specialize even in athletics. We had a boy this last year that specialized. I don't know how closely you followed the University of Texas football team, but we had a boy that kicked barefooted. Without a shoe, he literally kicked it with his bare toe right into the ball. Scored 51 points for us, kicking field goals and extra points. Without his kicking toe, I question very seriously that we'd have gone through undefeated. He only did one thing, and that was kick. But he could kick better than anyone on our football team, and he worked on it all summer long, all spring long. And from the time we hit the practice field until we hung him up at night, he practiced kicking. So as a result of this, he was able to be a part of and make a very vital contribution to a national championship football team, where otherwise he probably would never have suited up for the games. Tony Crosby, some of you probably remember reading about him this past fall. I coached at North Carolina State, visiting around there in the state. There was a mill town, textile mill, small town. They had a machine there at this little factory in which about 600 people were dependent on this machine being in operation before they could be at their labor. And one day the machine just flat quit running. These 600 people were standing around idle. So they sent for the local mechanics to come out and look the machine over. They worked on it a couple of days, no success, and they couldn't fix it. So they thought, well, we will send over to North Carolina State, over at Raleigh, and ask one of the engineers in the textile school to come and look this machine over and see if they can fix it. They came, worked on it a couple of days, no success either. So as a last resort, they thought they would send to New York and get a specialist to come in and look the machine over. And this specialist came down from New York, this little town in North Carolina, and you can imagine what kind of reception he got. Here were these mechanics, here were these engineers from North Carolina State lined up around the wall, around this machine, and I guess they were kind of like maybe I would be, I confess, maybe you'd be this way, that at times that, you know, if we couldn't succeed, we kind of hoped that he'd fail too. I guess this is the way they felt. This Yankee came down with his hat shoved on the back of his head, his collar pulled down, his tie pulled down, his collar open, hands jammed down in his pockets, and a cigarette dangling out of the corner of his mouth. Didn't say a word to anyone. He came in and circled the machine, eyeballed it, looked at it, walked over in the corner and picked up a sledgehammer, came back to the machine, gave it a tremendous belt on this wheel, and the wheel screeched a little, and it turned a little more, and then it started to jerk. First thing you know, it was just in smooth operation. Everyone was aghast. They said, well, do you think you've really fixed the machine? It was just humming like a brand new one. He said, I think so. He said, out of the 3,953 machines I've looked at this year, this is only the second time I've seen this happen. I don't think you'll have any more trouble with it. He goes back to New York and sent them a bill for $1,000. Of course, they wrote back and asked him, would he please itemize his services? And in the return mail, they received this itemized statement for picking up hammer and hitting belt one time, $1, or knowing where to hit, $999. ingenuity, if you can do one thing better than anyone else, chances are you can capitalize on it. The third thing, and I don't think you like it too much. I didn't much like it either when I first thought of it, and that's perspiration. You simply don't get something for nothing. You know, I found out a long time ago when I first thought that I could reach over here and snatch something easy without any work. I could outsmart someone and reach over here and get a real plum. I found out that what I had really wasn't worth having, because most of the things that I've really gone after in my life, I have found that someone else has had the same idea, and I have had to compete for that goal, and I've had to put some perspiration up here. I remember when my dad put a pail on my arm for the first time. We lived out on the edge of town. He sent me down to the barn. I'd always been under the impression that Dad's old Jersey gave 2 gallons of milk a day. If I found out she didn't have a damn thing to give away, I had to take it away from her. And it's been that way pretty much for me ever since. And you just have to kind of outwork the other people. And I know in my traveling around over the state of Texas, almost invariably the name of Dope Walker comes up. And they always talk of what a great natural athlete Dope Walker was and how easy things came for him. It was my pleasure to play with Dope in the first Senior Bowl that was ever played in Jacksonville, Florida. And I can attest to the fact that he had God-given talent. But I wish some type of statistics had been kept to know the number of hours that Dope Walker put on the practice field for every complimentary thing or every headline that he ever received. I only know of one person that has been able to compete and win with a minimum of ability, and that was a fat girl back home that won the shimmy contest in high school. See, she had a method. She started real fast, stopped quick, and then let nature take its course. I was invited to New York. This was after 1961 season to visit with the New York press. And after the luncheon was over, Murray Olderman, who had invited me up, he was the president of this particular group. After it was over, I had about 5 hours before I was to go back to Idlewild, catch a jet back to Dallas. And he says, Darrell, would you like to go out to Harlem with me? I'm going to go interview Sugar Ray Robinson. Well, I'd been to New York before, but I'd never been to Harlem. So I wanted to go for that reason. Another reason is that Sugar Ray Robinson has always been a favorite of mine. Here's a guy who has lost and won back the championship of the world 4 or 5 times. A great athlete in his prime. I saw him fight in his prime. It was a very interesting visit, just like I thought it would be. But with the one thing that Robinson said in this whole conversation that stuck with me was the fact that he felt if a fight ever lasted, this is when he was in his prime, he said if I can make a fight last 15 rounds, I know I can win. I knew he had great confidence. It was apparent. I saw him fight in Philadelphia back in his prime. I knew he had great confidence. But the thing I thought his confidence came from was his quick fist, or his footwork, or his boxing ability. But he said he felt that he could win in that fight if it went 15 rounds because he was confident that he had worked harder. He had trained harder. He had perspired more than any opponent he ever crawled in the ring. I'd like to skip over those 3. I'd like to go to the 4th. I think those 3 are important. But standing alone, I don't think you can truly succeed or truly be a champion. I think you'd have to have the 4th. And the 4th one, I think, is the one that's most important, would be inspiration. Inspiration has a lot of funny sources, you know. It might come from your minister. In my case, sometimes it came from my coaches, from my dad. It might come from a business associate or someone you have a great deal of respect for. If you don't mind me telling a personal experience, I'd like to tell you about some inspiration I received from my teammates back in college. I tell you this, not because I'm proud of it, because if I could go back to Norman, Oklahoma, and erase off the University of Oklahoma records one thing, this would be the thing I'd want to erase, because actually I'm ashamed of this little incident I'm going to tell you about. But this was in 1946. Right after the war, this is when freshmen were eligible to play with the varsity, and I was a true freshman, but I got to play with the varsity. This is when college had 2 platoon football. The colleges were playing on the free substitution. Coach Wilkinson decided that I should play on the defensive platoon. Well, I was just a freshman from a little town in southwest Oklahoma. Pretty green, not too smart, but I did know that the guys who had their pictures in the newspaper and the ones they were writing and talking about were those guys that were carrying the ball and throwing it and catching it on offense. So I didn't take too kindly to this defensive assignment. I know we were playing the University of Kansas this particular day, and I intercepted a pass. And I'd always thought of myself as an offensive star. That's what I was recruited as. That's what they all tell you, boys. And I had always thought that I could play offense, and I thought this. I thought, well, I intercepted this pass. I personally took the ball away from Kansas, and old coach is going to let me stay in here and run with it, so I confidently trotted back to the huddle. Found 11 people. I was burned up about it. I don't mind it. Don't mind telling you. You know, this is kind of red-ass giving. So I started trotting off the field, and as I go by coach, I kind of out the corner of my mouth, and as I said, I'm sorry that this ever happened, but it did. I said, I don't have leprosy, and I won't contaminate that ball. You let me stand out there and handle it a little bit. And so, you know, coach is kind of smooth, and he just kind of pushed me on over towards the bench, and I watched the rest of the game over there. And I got to thinking about it, and I wondered how I was going to get out of this problem. You know, I was already ashamed, I was embarrassed, but how am I going to get out of it? So I thought, well, if I'll scoot down to the end of the bench, the minute that gun goes off, if I'll hightail it for the shower and get out of there, I can get gone before coach is released from the press. And I almost had it made. I kind of goat showered, you know, halfway through water on me and halfway dried off, had my clothes hanging on me. I was tying my shoe just fast as I could, and I looked up, and here came coach through the door into our dressing room, and our eyes met. Have you ever walked down the street and you saw someone that you didn't want to see them, you kind of look off? That's what I did. I went back to tying my shoe. I stayed down plenty long for coach to get back in the dressing room where the coach is dressed, and as I looked up, there he was. And he says, Darrell, you seem to be in quite a hurry. He said, I want to talk to you. I said, oh, sure, coach, I'm just a fast dresser. And he said, well, I'd like to tell you a story that I tell on the banquet trail about two golfers. I said, well, sure, coach. You know, I thought you'd come to chew me out, and here he wants to tell me jokes. I said, well, sure, coach. He said, well, these two golfers said they liked to play together. Said neither one of them scored too well, but one of them could really bust that driver, and that was his favorite club. He could hit it a long ways. So he reaches down on this first tee, and in his bag, he pulled out a brand new Wilson Staff ball. I'm obligated because I'm on their advisory board. And he pulled out this brand new Wilson Staff ball, took his driver out, took a vicious cut at the ball, dubbed it, it trickled down the fairway out into the rough. He was upset not because he'd lost a stroke, but because he'd missed his favorite club, jammed it back in the bag, said, I'll take a wedge, knock this ball out of this tall grass and continue with my game. But after he gets over in the rough, he found that this ball had rolled up and was perfectly perched on an anthill. So he says, well, back to the driver again. He takes out the driver, said, the last time I must have looked up, said, this time I've got to keep the head down. Takes a vicious cut at the ball, fanned the ball, annihilated half anthill, killed half ant, but the ball was still perched up. So he backs up, says, I've got to slow down my backswing. He slowed down his backswing, another vicious cut at the ball, annihilated the other half anthill, killed all except two little ants that were scrambling underneath the ball. And at this point, coach paused a little bit and looked me right in the eye and said, one little ant said to the other, you know, if we're going to stay around here, we better get on the ball. Come in to tell me jokes. I knew he had a message to put over to me, and he put it over rather forcefully. And I thought about it over the weekend, and I knew that I had two choices. One, I should give up athletics, give up football, get out of it completely. Or I should change my attitude. And I will say this truthfully, from that day on, I tried to play where my coaches wanted me to play and where I could best help the football team. And this is that thing of inspiration that I'm going to tell you about. It wasn't long until I found that I had a little bit bigger hole to run in when I carried the ball. I had a little bit more pass protection. And it wasn't long until I was playing offensive football for the University of Oklahoma. And here were 35 to 40 teammates playing to help me. odds I've run across, and the best odds I ever hope to run across. 35, 40 to 1. And it was a great inspiration to me to know that my teammates cared that much about me. I think this thing of inspiration, and I think all of you know what I'm talking about, refusing to accept defeat. I think all the greats have had it. I think all the truly great competitors have had this inspiration coming from some source. I know this was back in 1962. We were playing, this was the year before, and we were playing the University of Arkansas, a real grudge battle in Austin, Texas. It was a toss-up football game. We hadn't been in the ball game too much. Arkansas had already kicked a field goal, and now this was in the third quarter, and Arkansas had the ball advanced down to our 1-yard line, mind you, to our 1-yard line, and on first down, Johnny Treadwell, our All-America linebacker and guard, stepped up into the huddle, and his teammates told me, he said this later, he says, "All right, man." He says, "We've got them right by the ass now." I said, "We've got them right where we want them." He said, "They've run out of running, they've run out of passing room, and they've got to come straight at us." Well, I confess to you, I didn't quite share his confidence. But I thought it was admirable that Johnny Treadwell felt this way about it. We've got them right where we want them. First down on our 1, they've got to come straight at us. This was back when I was about in the 3rd grade in Hollis, Oklahoma. I was going home with a little classmate of mine by the name of J.B. McEwen, a little cotton-headed guy. We were on our way home, and this guy, Chuck, who was in the 5th grade, about 50 pounds heavier, 2 years older, bounced J.B. out, and they had a fight. After the fight was over, we gathered up the books, and we were walking down the sidewalk, and I was trying to make my little pal feel better, and I put my arm around him. I said, "J.B., I'm sure sorry Chuck jumped on you and whipped you." And when I said that, he turned to me, and his eyes just sparkling, shooting fire. He said, "Darrell, he didn't whip me." I said, "Well, of course he did, J.B. He's two years older and 50 pounds heavier. You fought him hard. You gave a good fight, but heck, I saw the fight. The truth of the matter is, J.B., he just whipped you." He said he did like hell. He said he's just a little ahead. Said, "We ain't through fighting." I don't know whatever happened to J.B. I wish he'd have stayed around Hollis. He moved away before we got out of grade school, but I would like to have competed with a guy with that type of a fighting heart. This was when I was coaching at Mississippi State. We had gone into Lexington. This was my first year as head coach in a major college. And we had gone into Lexington, Kentucky, a 14-point underdog with our Mississippi State team. We jump out in the ball game 7-0. They tied up 7-7. We score again, missed extra point. We're leading 13-7 with a minute to go in the ball game. Bob Hardy, their great quarterback, completed the pass, scored. They kicked the extra point, and now they're ahead 14-13. I was the most dejected, hurt, mad, burned up, irritated young coach you've ever seen. I guess I should have been happy. We played them within 1 point when we were a 14-point underdog, in a sense a moral victory, but we were so close to having this first major college upset win. And I was just seething. And I know we lined up to receive the next kickoff now, and there's about 55 seconds left on the clock. A little guy from Greenville, Mississippi, 155 pounds, check the records, by the name of William Earl Morgan, pulling at my sleeve. Said, "Coach," said, "if you put me in it, let me tell Stanton, who was our quarterback, put me out to the left, flank me out there and throw 27 passes, I can get behind him for a touchdown." Well, 155 pounds, he looked like he needs a dose of worm medicine in the first place. Hadn't been off the bench all night, and he thinks he's going to come in and win this ball game, and I confess to you, my first impulse was to backhand him, but I walked on off, and I controlled myself, walked on down the bench, stood down there a little bit. They kicked off, great coverage. They nailed us on the 15-yard line, and now here we're looking at 85 yards of grass, and there's not about 40 seconds left in the game. But here's William Earl back over pulling my sleeve again, and I looked over at him, and I looked over on the field, and I saw our players with their chins hitting their chest, looked up and down the bench. Everybody had already given up. The Kentucky student body throwing pillows and throwing programs and hooping and hollering, getting ready to go to the dance that night, celebrating victory. And I looked at William Earl, and I thought to myself, you you the only guy in this stadium thinks we can win. I don't. I just grabbed him by the shoulders and I said, "Go on in, William Earl," and I shoved him out toward the huddle. He goes running in. He said, "Look," he said, "Coach, you're going to really be hacked if you don't put me out the left and throw 27 passes." He sent in this play. He gets behind him about this far, catches a dead on-the-run pass, and won that football game for us in the dying seconds of the football game. I don't know why he refused to accept defeat when everybody else in the stadium had. Right in the state of Texas, I think, is the greatest example of a guy of raw courage and comeback and inspiration that I have ever known or read about. Incidentally, I had an occasion to shake hands and visit with him just a little bit about 3 or 4 days ago at Shady Oaks there in Fort Worth, and I'm speaking of Ben Hogan. Those of you who know Ben Hogan or know the story of golf or know the story of Ben Hogan know that what I'm going to tell you is true. He had won the Masters in 1949. He was in California. He was on his way home with his wife driving in his car, and near Van Horn, Texas, he had a collision with a Greyhound bus. Out of this wreck, he came with a crushed, mangled left side. His shoulder was crushed. His left leg and his ankle was mangled so badly, they had to rush in the specialist, Dr. Oshner, from New Orleans, to perform a delicate operation to remove a blood clot. The doctors on the case, first of all, said Ben Hogan would never live. If he should live, he would never walk again, and playing competitive golf would be completely out of the question. Well, Ben Hogan fooled him on the first regard. He did live. He went into the hospital, the record says, weighing 148 pounds. When he was discharged to go home in Fort Worth, he weighed 93 pounds, but he had won the fight for his life. And in his bedroom at home, with the golf world knowing that the golfing career of Ben Hogan had been ended, Ben Hogan, with the aid of crutches and through much pain and agony, finally could circle his bedroom one time, then twice, then 3 times, then up to 49 times, and this encouraged him to go out to Colonial in Fort Worth and walk 3 holes of golf. He didn't play the first day. From this, he built up enough stamina to play a full 18, and the record also says that after this, he was so ill from pain that he had to go to bed for a week. This was 1950 now at the Los Angeles Open. Ben Hogan surprised everyone by showing up on the practice tee with his golf clubs. He said he had no intentions of playing. He had gone out to gallery the tournament, and he just thought he'd hit a few practice shots off the tee. He hit them so well that he thought he would enter, never thinking that he could finish, but he thought he could start and then drop out after a round. His first round, he shot a 73. He was back in the pack. And then he shot successive rounds of 69, 69, 69, and Sam Snead had to knock in a 30-foot putt on the last hole to time and throw it into a playoff. He didn't have the stamina to play the tournament to begin with, and with his legs so tightly bound, the playoff was out of the question, and of course Sam Snead trounced him pretty thoroughly. This was 1953 now. He entered 6 major tournaments and won 5 of them. He won the Masters again, the British Open, the U.S. Open, the Colonial, and the Pan American Open played in Mexico City. And all of this came from a guy that the doctor said would never live, would never walk, and playing competitive golf would be completely out of the question. We're from the section of the country, there in the Southwest, that's pretty competitive in its own right, and it seems to me, and this has been everything I've been able to check back through the records, that the bottom, the team that's in the bottom of the league has had the ability to come along and knock off the team that's fighting it out for the championship and maybe in sometimes even the national championship. I know from sad experience that this thing can happen. It's happened to us a couple of times where the team in the cellar has the ability to come along and knock off the ones fighting it out for the championship. And, you know, it's not that they want to accomplish too much, they just don't want to see you do too much. As I've said this, it's kind of like a cockroach. It ain't so much what he eats and totes off, it's what he falls into and messes up. But I've seen this thing go on in the Southwest Conference in the 7 years that I've been there. As a matter of fact, it came just that close, those of you that saw national television on Thanksgiving Day with Texas A&M. I tell you this, they were just about to put something on us we couldn't take off with Lysol. They were that close to having that ball game won. But it hasn't always been that Texas has been the team that has been upset. This was back in 1940 when D.X. Bible was coach at the University of Texas. And he was taking a team out on the field that had only won 2 games that season. They were playing an undefeated team of Texas A&M with John Kimbrough. And they had kind of stopped off in Austin on their way to Pasadena to the Rose Bowl. And D.X. Bible read to his team, a great big underdog that particular Thanksgiving Day. He read them a little poem. It's a simple little poem, and I'd like to read it to you. This is the poem that D.X. Bible read to his squad just before kickoff. It's about 2 little frogs. Once upon a time, down at the pool, 2 little froggies coming home from school decided they'd stop a while and play instead of going straight home that day. As usual, the milkman came on down with his can of milk for the folks in town. Well, this was along his beaten track where he always stopped for his noonday snack. Yes, at noon each day, this old milkman refreshed himself from his big milk can, while his trusty mare, as a general rule, refreshed herself from the froggies' pool. So today, this sleepy, tired milkman